probably these days, one of the questions I get asked more than anything else is, how do you find a cheap villa in Bali? And honestly, the answer is you've got to go do some walking or some riding around. You've got to go down these little tiny gangs and alleyways all around Bali. Just like the main road's just there, and there's another one on that side. And as you wander down through there, you see villas being built, you see for rent signs or for sale signs. And the main reason I recommend people to give it at least 3 to 6 months of living in Bali before you find a happy ever after place is it's really hard to find them. A lot of the ones on the internet are being managed by vendors or dealers who are putting their prices. So look, if you're looking for a cheap place to stay in Bali, you're not necessarily going to find that through an agent, because everyone's got their cut. Every agent has got a sub-agent or something. But you can find places like this here that are under construction, and you can generally go and ask the people in there who's running the show, what the boss's name is. And here's the thing, unfortunately a lot of them are Indonesian, so and often their English is limited, so it's not always easy to try to get to speak to the owner. But if it's a Western owner, you're laughing, because then you can talk to them, negotiate. They probably building these places on spec and don't have anyone ready yet, or tenants ready for them. Lots and lots of construction, even in the middle of what you would think is a densely populated area. There's empty lots. Many of these are for rent, and many of them are nowhere near what you'd expect to pay. A lot cheaper. You can rent this place long term for pennies. Practically everywhere you look, you'll find construction in Bali, and it can be a bit noisy. If you're staying next door and you've got some guy building multi-story apartment buildings, I tell you what, it could be pretty annoying, because they could be there for months. It tends to take about 6 months to build a house over here, from what I've heard, and longer if it's bigger. So you might want to watch what your neighbours are doing or what's happening. I'd rather build somewhere where there's already someone else's neighbours, because there's less chance of your sleep being disturbed once your house is finished. Today I'm here with Monica, and Frank's away today, but we're actually down on a building site, and we're going to be talking a little bit about how to find and the dangers of building here in Bali. Some of the things that they help you keep away from and help you to be aware of, as far as buying or locating or securing properties, and the rules. We talked about them quite a bit, but it's nice to be out and about today and having a bit of a look firsthand at what's going on. There's no hard and fast rules as to how this happens, and it's much harder if you don't speak the local language. But if you find an empty property in an area in Bali that you like the look of, sometimes you'll see a little sign on the wall that's got a for sale or rent sign or something. Sometimes you can go next door to the shops and ask them who owns the land, or if they can give you any details. But the simple way is to find out, ask the shop next door or the people, the neighbours, where is the Banjar office, where's the head, the little council village head. All of these little tiny streets are part of I guess a Banjar or a village. And if you can find out where the village is, find out the name or the location of that, that's where the local records are being kept. They're kept by the local Banjar. Find out who owns it from there, and you might have a chance at being able to connect with the owner and look at purchasing or leasing a property. It's a long process, and it's difficult, and it's if you can get onto someone that is looking to sell or to lease their land, it can be a very rewarding opportunity, because land like some of these places here, a small building block is what they call an ara. It's 10 metres by 10 metres, or it might be 3 by 7 or something, but generally it's 100 square metres. So in that 100 square metres you can build a nice little 1 or 2 story house with a little tiny bit of off-street parking, nothing massive. I guess we'd call them a tiny home, but over here they call it a home. And And you can do a fair bit on 1 hour. Now over here, if you wanted to rent a house or rent land and actually build your own house, to build a house on 1 hour, it's about 60 grand. Plus or minus, depending on how fancy you want to get. And if you look through some of my videos, Katut, my brother little Katut, built a beautiful 2-story, 3-bedroom house on 1 hour of land. And he was about 60, 70 grand. It's marble staircases and you name it, just absolutely stunning. So you can live quite, so on an hour of land, give or take, depending on if you're in a busy area or if you're in a downtown or close to the beach or something, but you can expect to pay around, I'll give you a guess, about $1,000 per year per 100 square meters per small building block. So most of the people over here will try to lease you land for about 20 years. Sometimes you can go for longer, but they tend to sort of do it to the next generation, so their grandchildren or their children can inherit the land or something like that. So, okay, you've bought or you've rented the land for 20 years. It's only cost you $20,000. Then you've turned around, you built your own little house, which has cost you another $60,000. So for 80 grand, you've got a place that's going to last you for 20 years. That's not a huge amount of money, but at the end of that 20 years, the house goes back to the owner, unless you've put a clause in your lease that you can do maybe 20 plus 20 with a rent increase or something else. So you don't get the residual value, you don't get resale or capital gains on that. You just get that piece of that, you just get the time. You're basically renting that space for time. You own that land for the period of that time, and you're responsible for pretty much what happens on that land over that time, and your own house. But when the lease is up, if you're not renewing the lease and it's not in the contract, expect that you'll walk away and say thanks, it was great. Now you can buy that, build that house, you can rent that house out, you can pass that house on through a will, or legally you can transfer the title to your own children, or the mortgage, sorry, not the mortgage, the loan. So the lease of that property will go on to your children or to whoever you want to share it with or sell it to or something. And that would also happen in a case of a divorce or something where your partners want to separate their assets and say, okay, well, I'll take the lease here, or we'll sell that lease, what's left on the lease. We might have 12 years left on that property in Bali. We'll sell that, we'll divide the money up. And so you can actually have the person that owns the land, you can have the person who built the house, which could be you, and then you can actually lease that off. So that's 3 tiers already, to someone else who's going to come in and take over the rest of that lease. And this is where it gets complicated, because on some properties in Bali you might have 5 or 6 layers of people. One built it, one bought it, one owns it, one rents it to someone else, one does long-term accommodation, and then someone comes in and does an Airbnb on top of that. All legal, everyone's trying to make $1 on the way through. But if someone under your level doesn't do what they're supposed to, you could end up holding the bag and end up with nothing. There is one thing I'll say about building in Bali. Generally, the construction techniques, look, they don't have the building code that we have in Australia. So they don't have the Australian Standards Association. They've got the Bali Standards Association. Now I say that laughingly because there are none. The concrete is not to any specifications. You can buy expensive bricks and blocks and expensive concrete, which is harder to get, or you can buy the old Bali special, and let me say, you very much get what you pay for. So people talk about, oh, in 20 years time I'm not going to have a house. Well, there's a good chance if you built it cheap in Bali, you're not going to have a house anyway in 20 years, because it's going to start to fall down in about 10 or 15 years. I'm serious. The construction techniques on these places, if they don't get maintained and looked after, even over COVID, there was hotels, multi-story hotels, that the weather got in and it got under the eaves or under the sheeting or something, and the concrete just starts to fall apart. So if you're living there and you're maintaining, so expect maintenance is going to be a significant part of the ongoing costs of owning a villa. But if you just buy something to walk away and you're trying to do it on the cheap, it's going to end up costing you money in the long run, because the concrete is just so cheap and flimsy and porous, It's such a low grade. The building standards, there are almost no building standards. From what I understand, there's no builder's license required. So anyone with a hammer and a screwdriver can get in there and build you a house, and they don't have to be a registered electrician. They can run speaker wire in the walls. Oh look, I have seen so many dodgy, really crazy building techniques, and I've seen some really good ones, but you pay for what you get. And if you're going to engage a contractor to build a place, you definitely want to ask him to show you some of the places he's built and get some references and have a look around, because you want to know if he was on time, you want to know if he was on budget, you want to look at the build finish. And if you see cracks all over the cement and you see things that look like, honestly, it just was never finished properly, or it was just finished to a very rough standard, I think you'll find most of the places you are going to look at, or most of the builders, are going to do things well under the standard that what you'd expect. And the only way you can keep them on top of what you need, like to the standards that you expect, is to almost go hand in hand. Frank says to me, you need to live on site pretty much, because you need to be there to say, no, that's not what I want. There is a communication issue. There's interpretation of your expectation. They look, little tiny simple things. They don't know that we automatically assume there's going to be hot water in the kitchen or even in the bathroom. So they won't normally put the plumbing in there to put hot water service, because that's not how they do it over here. Generally, you have, if you've got hot water, it might only be in the bathroom. And so they wash up in cold water, and it's, oh look, it doesn't make sense to me, but I come from a country where we've got a whole different system of doing stuff. They don't put PowerPoints all over the place, and they're ugly looking PowerPoints that they just stick out from the side of the wall, and they run the cables a lot of the times on the outside of the wall, and it just looks terrible. There's a million things. The water, when I don't think they've got laser levels over here, and when they make floor tiles, they just put a string line. I don't think I've seen a level. I've seen them use a piece of plastic tubing with a bit of water in it so they can see if it's got any fall, but they don't seem to put fall on a slab, so the water just sits there and puddles up in the low spots, and you've got to squeegee or towel it off every time you've got a spill. So there are thousands of little tiny things that you've got to be aware of if you're going to try and build in Bali. And if you're not a builder and you've got no idea what's going on, God, you want to make sure you've got a good contractor, because you'll get there when they finish the job and go, no, that's not good enough. It's almost too late. Like, honestly, it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge. And I understand when you get one of these firms that just come in and does it for and do it, the whole thing for you. It's a done deal before you finish, before you start, because you've seen the spec house, you've seen what their villas are like, and you can get a nice little one-bedroom place with a pool for $100,000, $150,000. You get a beautiful place for $200,000, $250,000 that you just walk in and live in tomorrow, that you own, or certainly you might own it for the next 50 years or something. So there are lots and lots of options around. But I tell you what, there's a lot of dodgy stuff too. There's a lot of things that if you just didn't know, you just wouldn't be aware.